Communication and Maritime Security, and the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity Infrastructure Protection and Innovation will come to order for today's hearing titled Cyber Threats in the Pipeline, Lessons from the Federal Response to the Colonial Pipeline Ransomware Attack. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the subcommittee in recess at any point. Thank you to Chairwoman Clark, Ranking Member Jimenez, Ranking Member Garbarino, and our panel of witnesses for joining us. The impacts of the May 7 ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline was far-reaching. As we all know now, nearly half of the East Coast fuel is supplied by the Colonial Pipeline. When the pipeline was shut down, Americans struggled to fill up their gas tanks, and the incident threatened to cause major disruptions to the economy and well-being of our country. That is why it is so important for us to have a conversation today about the federal government's response to the Colonial incident and its role in ensuring the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure. Last week, we heard from the CEO of Colonial Pipeline about how his company responded to the ransomware attack against it. I also asked him why his company, prior to the attack, appears to have resisted TSA's efforts to assess the pipeline security prior to the attack. Today, we will hear from TSA and CISA, the DHS components that are charged with ensuring the cybersecurity of our nation's pipelines and responding to cyber incidents. I am looking forward to learning not only about TSA and CISA's engagement with Colonial before and after this incident, but also about their plans to ensure we are better prepared next time. And unfortunately, we know that there will be a next time. In recent weeks, we've seen 2 transportation systems fall victim to ransomware attacks in New York City and in Massachusetts. Hospitals have been brought to a halt. Even one of our nation's largest meat packers was shut down. We must ask ourselves what's next. Our power grid, our aviation system, maybe the next time it won't be foreign hackers looking for a quick payday, but rather a nation state looking to cripple our economy. Given the magnitude of these threats, we need to ensure CISA and sector-specific agencies like TSA have the tools and the authorities that they need to take action and that they use them. In the pipeline context, since TSA's establishment nearly 20 years ago, it has been the principal federal entity responsible for pipeline security. To this end, TSA publishes pipeline security guidance and conducts pipeline security assessments and inspections, including assessments that focus specifically on cybersecurity. To date, these assessments have been voluntary, and unfortunately, voluntary standards have proven insufficient. According to TSA, prior to the attack, TSA had asked Colonial Pipeline on no less than 13 occasions to participate in physical and cyber pipeline security assessments. Citing COVID-19, Colonial repeatedly delayed and chose not to participate. On multiple occasions, Colonial didn't even bother responding to TSA's emails. In fact, Colonial still has not agreed to participate in the physical assessment and only agreed to cooperate with TSA's cybersecurity assessment 3 weeks after the ransomware attack occurred. What's more, when a member of this committee asked Colonial's CEO whether he'd accept CISA's assistance, he politely but firmly declined. If this is at all indicative of how pipeline owners and operators view their regulators and their federal partners, we have a problem. Although many of these systems may be owned by private companies, when you operate infrastructure that we all depend on, you have a responsibility to the public. The good news is that the TSA administrator has existing authority, statutory authority, to address this. Just a few weeks ago, TSA used this authority to impose the first mandatory cybersecurity requirements on pipeline owners and operators. Specifically, Now, they must report breaches, designate cybersecurity coordinators, and self-assess their compliance with TSA security guidance. This is an important first step, but there's clearly more that needs to be done. We must resource and empower TSA and CISA to act boldly and swiftly to ensure operators of pipelines and all other forms of transportation harden their systems. Meanwhile, it is similarly important that other agencies in the federal government respect TSA and CISA's experience and expertise on these matters. The cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure is too serious for us to reinvent the wheel by providing duplicative authorities to the Department of Energy. DHS has the existing statutory authority and technical talent that we need to tackle this challenge. And finally, before I conclude, I must note my disappointment that the FBI declined an invitation to attend this meeting. It is critical that members fully understand the FBI's role and efforts to countering cyber threats, and I look forward to their participation in future events on these topics. That said, I'm looking forward to hearing from today's witnesses about how the attack on Colonial Pipeline will inform their approaches going forward. And the chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Transportation and Maritime Security, the gentleman from Florida, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Watson-Coleman, Chairwoman Clark, and Ranking Member Garbarino. I am pleased that the CIPI, CP, and TMS committees are holding this joint hearing today on cyber threats to pipelines. As we saw with the recent ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline, securing our nation's 2.7 million miles of pipeline is of utmost importance. I look forward to hearing today from Mr. Eric Goldstein of CISA and Ms. Sonia Proctor of TSA on how CISA and TSA work together to ensure pipelines are secure from cyber threats. I thank the witnesses for their time today. I'm interested to hear from TSA on the pipeline industry's compliance with the security directive that TSA issued last month. I look forward to Ms. Proctor detailing what plans TSA has for additional directives in the near future. I am concerned with the push to move pipeline security oversight from the Department of Homeland Security and into the Department of Energy. I wholeheartedly agree that there is more that TSA can do in terms of increasing its resources and expertise, but I believe TSA or the Department of Homeland Security is the appropriate agency to oversee pipeline security. TSA's close collaboration with CISA serves to ensure that there is a strong DHS effort in securing all transportation modes against cyber threats. As a committee, we need to continue to strengthen our nation's cybersecurity by strengthening CISA and giving them all the tools and responsibilities needed to keep all of our cyber infrastructure safe and secure. I look forward to the discussion today and finding ways to improve security of our nation's pipelines against continued threats of cyber attack, and frankly, all of our nation's security threats and how we can protect the United States of America from cyber threats in the future. And Madam Chairwoman, I also share your displeasure that the FBI did not participate today. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member. The chair now recognizes the chairwoman of the Subcommittee Cybersecurity, Infrastructure, Protection, and Innovation, the gentle lady from New York, for an opening statement.
I thank you, Madam Chairwoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman, to Ranking Members Jimenez and Garbarino. I thank you for working with me on today's hearing, and to our witnesses for joining us today. The ransom attack on Colonial Pipeline was a reminder to us all that cyber attacks can do more than compromise our data. We've seen ransomware attacks cripple hospitals, manufacturers, municipalities, and meat packers. We've seen ransom demands skyrocket, operations brought to a standstill, and organizations left without many viable options aside from paying an unknown group of criminals who may or may not be subject to U.S. sanctions. Unfortunately, the takeaway for many of our criminals behind these attacks is ransomware is easy money. These attacks are not the stuff of SolarWinds. They're simple, unsophisticated, and rely on common cybersecurity missteps present in most organizations. I say this not to be fatalistic, but to acknowledge the tremendous challenge we face. These attacks are not going to slow down, and adversaries have learned that the higher the stakes for the victim, the higher the payout they'll likely get. If there's one message I hope to drive home today, it's that this administration needs to have a plan for responding to cyber incidents and be ready to execute that plan at a moment's notice. Specifically, the National Cyber Incident Response Plan, which lays out clear roles for CISA, FBI, and other parts of the federal government that play a role in responding to cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. We also have long-standing directives like PPD 21 and PPD 41 that make CISA responsible for coordinating federal efforts to secure critical infrastructure and doing so hand in hand with sector risk management agencies like TSA, which oversees security for the pipeline sector. It appears the administration deviated from that plan in a number of ways, and I want to understand why that happened and what's being done to fix it. I want to see this administration become a well-oiled machine when it comes to responding to these attacks, because that's what will be demanded moving forward. The second point I hope to make today is this. Although CISA has come a long way in a short amount of time, there are still parts of its mission that we need to clarify. And there are parts of its mission that we need to authorize and resource commensurate to the enormous job we're asking this new agency to do. Right now, CISA is tasked with leading asset response activities during a significant cyber incident. But what if the victim organization hires FireEye instead? What if they decline CISA's offer to provide technical assistance and delay or refuse to share information about the incident with CISA? What if they never report the incident to the federal government in the first place? This undermines our national security. CISA needs access to information it can use to understand the threat landscape and develop technical indicators that will help other entities prepare for similar attacks. As I've said before, I'm working on legislation that will require critical infrastructure to report certain cybersecurity incidents to CISA so that we're developing the muscle memory and the institutional knowledge to improve our cyber defenses over time. But this is only half of the battle. CISA also needs real-time visibility into threats on private sector networks, so they're empowered to collaborate with owners and operators before, during, and after an attack, or prevent the attack from happening in the first place. This is especially true for the industrial control systems that power pipeline operations, energy generation, and countless other industrial functions we rely on each and every day. These systems are increasingly connected to business and IT networks, which makes them vulnerable, and simply severing those connections is not always feasible. For the past few years, CISA has been piloting a program called Cybersecurity that gives CISA the ability to monitor and detect cyber threats on participating critical infrastructure partner networks and work proactively with owners and operators to address threats in real time. This is exactly the kind of operational role that Congress envisions CISA playing on critical infrastructure cybersecurity, and I am currently working on legislation to strengthen and codify these efforts. I would be remiss if I did not mention that the federal government can only do so much. We need private sector critical infrastructure to step up, not just by investing in their own cybersecurity, but also by partnering with the federal government. We need the private sector to open the door to CISA and TSA, not just because it benefits them, but because it benefits our collective national security. In conclusion, I will also echo the chairwoman's disappointment and our ranking member's disappointment that the FBI declined our invitation to participate in today's hearing. You cannot espouse the virtues of a whole of government response 1 minute and then refuse to appear before the Congress with your interagency partners the next. But I nevertheless look forward to hearing from the DHS officials who have answered the call to testify before us today. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady from New York. I now recognize the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Protection, and Innovation, the gentleman from New York, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman. First, I'd like to thank you as well as Chairwoman Clark and Ranking Member Jimenez for calling this important hearing, and I thank our witnesses for being here today. Last week's full committee hearing on this topic was an important opportunity to peer into the decision-making process at Colonial and to better understand the business or victim-facing side of an attack. This week's hearing affords us a unique opportunity to closer examine the federal government's coordination and response efforts following an attack. While Ranking Member Kako, myself, and our partners on the other side of the aisle have all expressed concern with the White House's decision to have the Department of Energy leading the federal response to this attack instead of CISA and TSA as the lead agencies for the pipeline sector, we should all recognize that the decision was not any of yours to make. We are very appreciative of your efforts in response to this hack and many others. But there are clearly still many questions regarding this attack that need answers, and I hope we're able to get clarity on the outstanding issues here today. I'm also interested in learning more about the value CISA is providing to industry leadership, such as organization CEOs and CIOs. CISA provides a treasure trove of helpful guidance and resources for organizations to bolster their cyber posture, but it's increasingly clear that it should be hitting the desk of our nation's CEOs and CIOs who are making the tough investment decisions. While many of the members of our subcommittees understand the inherent value that CISA provides to agencies and industry alike, the truth is that CISA still has a lot to prove to the Hill, and it's important that you all are able to demonstrate that value. As the newest agency with the newest department, you're going to have to be forceful in staking your claim to ensure you're all leading the charge on major cyber incidents. The White House also shoulders some responsibility. It must empower CISA with the stature to be successful and appropriately delineate responsibilities between CISA, the sector risk management agencies, and the incoming National Cyber Director. Cyber threats are rarely isolated to one sector, thus CISA's role as a central agency that can connect the dots and share threat information across multiple sectors will help secure all critical infrastructure across our nation. It is also important that you are all not bashful when it comes to highlighting areas that need strengthening and areas that require additional resources, personnel, or authorities. Thank you all for being here today, and I yield back.
Thank you very much to the ranking member. Members are also reminded that the committees will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and the ranking member in their February 3rd colloquy regarding remote procedures. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for an opening statement.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I want to thank Chairwoman Watson-Coleman and Chairwoman Clark for holding this important hearing on the federal response to the recent ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline. The attack on May 7th that resulted in a week-long shutdown of 5,500 miles of petroleum pipeline on the East Coast clearly represents a significant cyber attack on critical transportation infrastructure. It is clear that the future will bring more attacks like this, whether the organization like dark side that seek to exploit cybersecurity weaknesses for profit, or foreign enemies seeking to weaken our nation. The federal government must be prepared to fight off attacks and respond to successful security breaches swiftly and effectively. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is the lead federal coordinator for securing critical infrastructure from cyber attacks, and the Transportation Security Administration is the designated sector risk management agency for pipeline. Yet, Colonial failed to properly engage with TSA in recent months in order to safeguard their pipelines against attacks and repeatedly rejected technical assistance from CISA following the ransomware incident. While I'm pleased that Colonial has finally agreed to a virtual cybersecurity assessment from TSA, I'm alarmed that they refused to do so until 3 weeks after an attack that resulted in the full shutdown of their pipeline. Despite the authority placed within the Department of Homeland Security to respond to cyber attacks on pipelines, including through TSA's authority to issue emergency security directives, the Department of Energy was made the lead agency for response to the Colonial incident. Additionally, the federal government did not deem the attack a significant cyber incident as defined by policy, despite its substantial impact. If you don't believe me, ask those folk who were trying to find gasoline all over everywhere while this event was going on. It was a significant cyber event. Cyber incidents response plans have been carefully crafted to ensure proper government response to incidents, and we must ensure they are followed appropriately. The attacks on Colonial and other provide opportunities to learn and improve the resiliency of the pipeline sector and critical infrastructure across the U.S. I was pleased to see TSA take initial action by issuing the first ever mandatory cybersecurity requirements for pipelines. These new requirements went into effect on May 28th and will be critical to improving coordination among the pipeline industry, CISA, and TSA. More must be done to increase protections for our pipeline and allow federal authorities greater ability to assess weaknesses in critical transportation infrastructure. Unfortunately, cyber criminals are not going anywhere anytime soon. In fact, they are getting smarter, and cyber attacks are likely to become more common. We must ensure the Department of Homeland Security remains at the forefront of protecting our critical infrastructure from these threats. I look forward to our testimony. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I now would like to welcome our panel of witnesses. Ms. Sonia Proctor is the Assistant Administrator for Surface Operations at the Transportation Security Administration. In her role, she is responsible for strategic surface transportation security operations, not only agency-wide, but also on a national level and scope in all surface transportation modes, including mass transit, freight, rail, highway, motor carrier, and pipelines. Ms. Proctor has served in several roles at TSA previously, including in leadership roles at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport and within the Office of Law Enforcement and Federal Air Marshal Service. Prior to joining TSA, Ms. Proctor served 25 years in the Metropolitan Police Department, rising from a patrol officer to interim chief of police, and she served as the chief of police for the Amtrak department. Mr. Eric Goldstein serves as the Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. In his role, Mr. Goldstein leads CISA's mission to protect and strengthen federal civilian agencies and the nation's critical infrastructure against cyber threats. Previously, Mr. Goldstein was the head of cybersecurity policy strategy, and regulation at Goldman Sachs, and he served in various leadership roles as CISA's precursor agency, the National Protection and Programs Directorate. Mr. Goldstein has also practiced cybersecurity law at an international law firm, led cybersecurity research and analysis projects at a federally funded research and development center, and served as a fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Without objection, the witness's full statements will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his or her statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Ms. Proctor.
Good afternoon, Chairwomen Watson Coleman and Clark, ranking members Jimenez and Garbarino, and distinguished members of the subcommittees. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss TSA's role in securing our nation's pipeline systems. I also thank you for your indulgence as I resolve my own technology issues this afternoon. Our nation's pipeline systems are vital to the economy, our national security, and the livelihood of our country. There are more than 2.8 million miles of natural gas and hazardous liquid pipelines owned and operated by over 3,000 private companies. Pipelines are susceptible to physical attacks and, as recently evidenced, cyber intrusions as well. These threats have the potential to negatively impact our national security, economy, commerce, and well-being. For these reasons, TSA remains committed to securing our nation's pipelines against evolving and emerging risks. To support this commitment, in October 2019, TSA established the Office of Surface Operations and expanded its pipeline security staff from 6 positions to 34 positions working on field and headquarters operations and policy development. TSA has had a long-established, productive, private-public partnership with government partners and the pipeline industry to protect the transport of hazardous liquids and natural gas. To support pipeline owners and operators in securing their systems, TSA developed and distributed security training materials for industry employees and partners to increase domain awareness and ensure security expertise is widely shared. And in conjunction with the pipeline industry and our government partners, TSA developed the Pipeline Security Guidelines to provide a security structure for pipeline owners and operators to use in developing their security plans and programs. While the guidelines are not mandatory, the recommended security measures for both physical and cyber security serve as the de facto industry standard. TSA works with industry partners to assess and mitigate vulnerabilities and improve security through collaborative efforts, including intelligence briefings, exercises, assessments, and on-site reviews. 2 key examples would be the validated architecture design reviews to promote a secure and resilient cybersecurity posture that TSA conducts in coordination with CISA to assess a pipeline operator's critical infrastructure, including information technology and operational technology systems, and the pipeline corporate security reviews and pipeline critical facility security reviews that assess the degree to which that a pipeline company is adhering to the pipeline security guidelines, physical and cyber security measures. In response to the recent pipeline cyber intrusion, TSA used its statutory authority and issued a security directive, which has the force of a regulation aimed to strengthen the cybersecurity and resilience of pipeline owners and operators. TSA is committed to using its authority to implement appropriate security measures to elevate both the physical and cybersecurity of the pipeline industry. In addition, TSA, in close coordination with the department and CISA, continues to explore ways to mitigate threats through additional cybersecurity measures to ensure that critical pipeline owners and operators are engaging in baseline cyber hygiene and have contingency plans in place to reduce the risk of significant disruption of operations if a breach occurs. The pipeline system is crucial to U.S. national security, transportation, and energy supply, and that drives TSA's work to continue collaborating with our government and private partners to expand the implementation of intelligence-driven, risk-based policies and programs. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss TSA's pipeline security program, and I look forward to your questions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Proctor. Now I will recognize Mr. Goldstein to summarize his testimony for 5 minutes.
Chairman Thompson, Chairwomen Watson, Coleman, and Clark, Ranking Members Jimenez and Garbarino, members of the committee, thank you for the chance to testify today. As noted in the members' opening statements, cybersecurity threats represent an urgent risk to our national security, economic security, and public health and safety. The committee is to be commended for your continued focus on this issue and for your support of CISA's essential role therein. As the lead agency for civilian cybersecurity, CISA plays several key roles in managing the risk of ransomware and other intrusions. In particular, recognizing that most ransomware intrusions exploit known vulnerabilities and common security weaknesses, CISA develops and shares best practices to help organizations reduce the likelihood and impact of a ransomware intrusion. To this end, in January of this year, CISA unveiled our Reduce the Risk of Ransomware campaign. A few months later, in April, Secretary Mayorkas initiated a high-profile ransomware sprint that included a series of national events intended to ensure that leaders across the country understand the criticality of these risks and take urgent actions in response. And our work has continued as we further release updated guidance and consider novel approaches to drive risk reduction. CISA additionally serves a critical role in providing support to victims of cybersecurity incidents and sharing actionable information to protect future possible victims. Upon learning of the Colonial pipeline intrusion, CISA immediately began to collaborate with the FBI and other federal partners to gather information that could be used to help protect other potential victims of these sorts of serious campaigns. Within 4 days of the intrusion, CISA and the FBI published a cybersecurity advisory with specific mitigations to reduce the likelihood and impact of similar events. We then updated this advisory with technical indicators of compromise and amplified the alert to maximize use by network defenders, including through a stakeholder call with nearly 9,000 participants from across critical sectors. These activities reflect CISA's role in national cybersecurity. While CISA's expert network defenders are available to provide incident response and threat hunting upon request, of equal importance is our role in quickly using information from intrusions to protect others. And well before the Colonial intrusion, CISA was taking action to address cybersecurity risks facing the pipeline sector. In particular, through the Pipeline Cybersecurity Initiative, CISA works closely with TSA and pipeline companies to conduct vulnerability assessments, analyze risks to the sector, and implement a key pilot program called CyberSentry, which, as Ms. Clark noted, leverages commercial technologies and sensitive threat information to monitor certain highly critical infrastructure networks for sophisticated threats. But going forward, it's very clear as a nation, we must do more to address the risks of ransomware and other cyber intrusions affecting our nation's critical infrastructure. To this end, CISA is urgently driving progress in several key areas. First, we must gain increased visibility into cybersecurity risks and use this visibility to produce targeted guidance, share actionable information, and prioritize incidents that do occur. TSA's recent security directive that requires reporting of cybersecurity incidents to CISA is one key step, and we continue to evaluate potential ways to drive further reporting of incidents and cybersecurity risks to CISA in order to further enable this essential visibility. Second, we must continue to invest in and mature our voluntary partnerships with critical entities across the country. Going forward, we are implementing our joint cyber planning office to plan, exercise, and coordinate cyber defense operations between government and the private sector. Third, we must leverage lessons learned and capabilities matured through our federal cybersecurity mission, including through activities undertaken in executing the president's recent executive order to support our partners across critical infrastructure, including by conducting persistent hunts, ingesting, analyzing, and acting upon security data, and driving adoption of defensible network architectures. Funding provided in the American Rescue Plan Act is a critical down payment in driving this essential change. Additionally, the establishment of a Cyber Response and Recovery Fund, or a CRRF, will ensure that CISA has sufficient resources and capacity to respond rapidly to cyber incidents. Recommended by the Cyberspace Solarium Commission and recently passed by the Senate, we do hope that the CRRF will be considered soon by the House and provide CISA with additional resources to conduct our rapidly evolving and essential mission. In conclusion, our nation is facing unprecedented cybersecurity risk, and the list of significant incidents in recent months is long and growing. Now's the time to act, and CISA is leading our national call to action. We will deepen our partnerships, enhance our visibility into national cybersecurity risk, and drive targeted action. In collaboration with our partners in the public and private sector, our international allies, and with Congress, we will make progress in addressing this risk and maintaining the availability of critical services to the American people. Thank you again for the chance to appear today, and I very much look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. I want to thank both of the witnesses for their testimony. And I will remind the subcommittee that we will each have 5 minutes to question the panel. I'll now recognize myself for questions. The TSA pipeline security assessments are currently voluntary. Although a new security directive does require operators to self-assess their compliance with TSA's cybersecurity guidance, this security directive also requires critical pipeline operators to report cyber incidents and designate a cybersecurity coordinators who will be available 24/7. So, Ms. Proctor, I'd like to ask you first, would you please discuss the process that led up to this security directive? How did TSA determine the directive was needed? And how did you decide to include these specific elements? You have to unmute yourself, Ms. Proctor. Ms. Proctor?
Madam Chairwoman, I'm sorry if that was directed to me. I'm having some connection problems again. I beg your indulgence again. I'm requesting some assistance.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? I don't have any questions for Mr. Why don't we skip me and I don't have. Which one?
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I'm having some technical problems again. The voice is going in and out. I'm requesting some assistance. So I beg your indulgence one more time here.
Thank you. Mr. Goldstein, then may I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Beyond pipelines, have you considered promulgating cybersecurity standards for other surface transportation modes like mass transit and airports?
Thank you, ma'am, for that question. In general, CISA's goal is to be a source of cybersecurity expertise across all sectors. Where a given sector is subject to regulations by a regulator with particular jurisdiction, we certainly engage in discussions with regulators like TSA to ensure that they are benefiting from CISA's cybersecurity expertise when they're developing regulations that are applicable to entities within their given jurisdiction. We have a robust collaboration with TSA along those lines, and certainly look forward to similar conversations with other regulators based upon their own unique authorities.
So I'm going to take that as a yes. I'm going to take that as a yes.
We certainly support strong cybersecurity across all sectors, ma'am. That's correct.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. I did have some questions for Ms. Proctor, but unfortunately she is not able to answer those questions. So if we clear this up in the next few minutes, I will ask her questions. But now I will go to the ranking member, Mr. Jimenez, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I really appreciate it. This is for Mr. Goldstein.
Because that's the only question I had for him, right?
Mr. Goldstein, is there any really difference? I understand that TSA has jurisdiction, I guess, over pipeline security, but I look at cybersecurity a little bit different than, say, physical security over the physical aspect, the pipeline itself. And we know that there are threats to the pipeline. If somebody does sabotage, et cetera, those are things that we need to protect, and TSA needs to do that. But in terms of cybersecurity, is there really a difference between the control systems for the computer network, the thing that's going to be hacked, for a pipeline and, say, an airport or a bank or any such thing? Isn't ransomware really attacking the computer systems themselves, and it really doesn't matter what industry that computer system is controlling?
So thank you for that question. I think there are two ways to answer it. The first is, I think your last statement is absolutely correct. Ransomware is a threat that can impact any organization in any sector, big or small, financial, energy, hospitality, across the board. Which is why CISA has been so focused on promulgating these cross-cutting best practices and guidance, including our advisory promulgated after the Colonial intrusion that is equally applicable to any organization. Because as you imply, these sorts of cybersecurity best practices are generalizable across sectors. Now, it's also the case that different sectors may use different specific technologies. They may have different network architectures or different ways to use devices to achieve their operational needs. But when it comes to these cybersecurity practices that we want to see, things like making sure that your software is patched, making sure that you're using multi-factor authentication, leveraging offline backups, those are practices that are generalizable across sectors and regardless of the size of company.
And so when CISA makes a recommendation, do you make a recommendation to the agencies and across the federal spectrum and say these are the things we recommend that you then recommend, or write a regulation for your specific sector? Is that the way it works here in the federal government?
So in general, CISA puts out guidance and best practices, and in the case of federal agencies, directives that are generally applicable. Occasionally, we will put out guidance that is specific to control systems, or certainly if we know about a given threat or incident that's affecting a particular sector, we may produce a targeted alert or warning focused on nuanced risk to a given sector or even a given device where we have information that a certain device is being exploited. Regarding our interaction with regulators, generally regulators, including TSA, may seek CISA's expert advice and consultation on how to produce cybersecurity regulations that actually drive improved security and can be expected to reduce the likelihood of damaging incidents affecting that sector. But given the unique authorities and independence of many regulators, CISA is generally a font of expertise for those regulators to exercise their authorities in this space most effectively.
And that's where I have a problem, okay? The problem that I have is that it appears to me that CISA is there to protect basically the thing that we're communicating with right now, okay? And that is the control systems that are controlling most of America now. Energy, the electricity, the pipelines, banks, is coming out of the computer, and the computers are being hacked, and that's where our vulnerability lies. My concern is that different agencies may put different emphasis on the vulnerability that we have for cyber attacks and that it's really not focused. TSA's focus for the most part, I see is the real focus is airport security, port security, and all that, physical security. And then cyber attacks, yeah, okay, but that may not be our core mission. Whereas your core mission is cyber attacks. So wouldn't it be better for the federal government to kind of gel that into your agency and you become the voice on what needs to be done on cybersecurity? That's an opinion I'm asking for you, and I know that it's a loaded question. So if you can answer it, please do.
Without question, CISA's key role today is being the federal civilian government's lead voice on cybersecurity. And our goal is to use every single platform to make sure that business leaders, that federal agencies, that regulators understand the criticality of this risk and act on it with urgency and immediacy. Certainly under current law, our goal is to work with agencies that have unique authorities to drive change, to help them use those authorities to maximize security improvement within their sector. But to your point, we strongly agree that cybersecurity needs to be a top of mind issue in every boardroom, in every C-suite, and in every federal agency.
Thank you. I see that my time is up. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now recognize the chair lady from, the gentlelady from New York for her 5 minutes.
I thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Goldstein, as I said in my opening remarks, I believe that for CISA to carry out its broad cyber mission effectively, it needs, number one, greater access to information about major cyber incidents, and number two, greater visibility into threats targeting private sector networks in real time. That is why I'm working on two pieces of legislation. One would require critical infrastructure owners to report cyber incidents to CISA, and the other would authorize the capabilities CISA has built through the CyberSentry pilot. I see these efforts as complementary, giving CISA the ability to monitor threats today and also learn how and why they're successful so we can prevent them from happening tomorrow. Can you talk about how CyberSentry works and some of the ways that it helps CISA partner with more effectively with the private sector?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. And to begin, thank you for your ongoing support of CISA. It is deeply appreciated. As you noted, one of the challenges that CISA and frankly our country faces is a lack of visibility into cybersecurity risks facing our nation's critical infrastructure. And when we say cybersecurity risks, we should be precise about what we're speaking about. What we are talking about is the possibility of criminal groups or nation states breaking into our critical infrastructure with the intent to do harm. Without that visibility, CISA is unable to fully conduct two of our core functions. The first is to understand systemic risk across our country and provide actionable information that can protect others so they can either detect and block these threats before break-ins occur, or they can evict adversaries from their networks once the intrusion happens. We're also not able to fully understand those entities that may need our voluntary assistance in order to help understand the intrusion, remediate, and recover. CyberSentry provides a unique capability to help protect the most critical infrastructure in this country. And what we've learned from a long history of cybersecurity intrusions is that many intrusions impacting critical infrastructure and particularly control systems actually begin on business networks. And so CyberSentry provides commercial off-the-shelf technology that helps detect cybersecurity threats that are attempting to move from business networks to the operational technology or control systems network, and provides coverage of both and allows CISA to use sensitive information about particular adversaries or threats to help understand and rapidly identify those kind of threats manifesting across the most critical networks. Now, CyberSentry is only a pilot today. It is deployed across a limited number of highly critical entities, but we have seen significant success with this program thus far. It both provides CISA with the added visibility, ma'am, that you mentioned, and also provides real concrete benefits to the owner-operators that are using CyberSentry in the first instance, and we look forward to further maturing the pilot as we go forward.
today as part of our as part of your pilot, so that can be instructive as we're drafting this authorization. So thank you so very much for your work in this space. I know Ms. Proctor has joined us again. Can you hear us, Ms. Proctor? You may be.
Yeah, and please accept my apologies.
No, understood. You know, everything is not perfected yet. So we're just happy you're able to join us. I would like to ask just a quick question about the PPD 41, the National Cybersecurity Incident Response Plan. Is that something that you're familiar with?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay, there's a little delay, I guess, in your audio. On this committee, we spend a lot of time talking about the need for all organizations, large, small, public, and private, to have incident response plans in place before an emergency, whether it's a flood, a fire, or a ransomware attack. It's important that in a crisis, there's a framework to guide decision-making and everyone knows what role they're supposed to play. The PPD 41 National Cyber Incident Response Plan lays out the federal roles and responsibilities or lines of effort. Would you agree with me that the Colonial Pipeline cyber incident was likely to result in demonstrable harm to the national security interests or the economy of the United States as defined under PPD 41?
Ms. Proctor, you may answer
Yes,
this
ma'am.
question.
She's delayed on her audio.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that your time has expired, but she certainly may respond to your question, ma'am.
Appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am, I would agree with you on that, that it was a significant incident.
Very well. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. I now recognize Mr. Carbarino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Goldstein, the committee has concerns with the White House's decision to place the Department of Energy at the helm of the federal government's response to the ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline. In this case, DOE is not the sector risk management agency, nor does it have a lead role in the cyber incident response in this case. DHS via TSA is the co-lead sector risk management agency for pipeline sector, along with the Department of Transportation. Additionally, the National Cyber Incident Response Plan designates DHS via CISA as the lead agency for the response. What rationale were you and Acting Director Wales given for DOE being given the lead response to this incident? Did you or any of CISA's leadership raise concerns with the White House about that, about DOE being put in charge?
Certainly. Hey, Congressman, I think it's useful to separate the various elements of this incident because it is one of the first incidents that we've seen in this country where a cyber event led to a decision to disrupt a physical function upon which Americans depend. And there really were, I think, three distinct aspects to the incident. The first was the cyber intrusion itself. The cyber intrusion, insofar as the federal response went, was managed in accordance with PPD 41. The FBI, of course, led the threat response, and CISA led the asset response. Now, it happened to be in this circumstance, as Colonial CEO testified last week, that Colonial chose to engage a third-party incident response firm rather than accepting CISA's response for incident response assistance. Under current law, that is certainly the prerogative of a company to do. Not providing on-the-ground incident response assistance, CISA focused on our broader asset response role of protecting others. And as mentioned in my opening statement, we shared urgent alerts, warnings, and advisories with detailed information to protect other organizations from this specific ransomware group and the broader ransomware threat. The second element of this incident is the broad coordination of the national response. And of course, under PPD 21, the Secretary of Homeland Security plays a critical role in coordinating the response to cyber or physical incidents affecting critical infrastructure. And here, Secretary Mayorkas certainly played that role in close coordination with the White House and with our partners in the interagency. And of course, our secretary was at the White House podium and was one of the key national figures communicating about their response. The third aspect, of course, was the fuel supply issue, assuring that Americans actually had fuel available to fill their tanks and that businesses were able to keep operating. And that is an issue within the remit of DOE and was one of the core focuses of the government's interaction with Colonial, recognizing that, as advised by the company, the cyber incident was being managed by a well-regarded third party. And so DOE's role in this incident, and part of the reason for their centrality, was the justifiable national focus on the fuel supply issue and DOE's unique expertise and equities in assuring appropriate provision of fuel across the Eastern Seaboard during the duration of this incident.
I get that, but this was the team, they were put in charge of the team for the government's response to the ransomware attack, and this right now is a pipeline. Next time we don't know what it is. So don't you think that, or do you feel that further clarification is needed on the federal level as to who's should CISA be the lead on all of these, or because they're with a ransomware, it's always going to be ransomware. We just don't know what other industry it's going to hit. So I don't know if that makes sense that having DOE in charge of this one, but then somebody else in charge of another one. Do you think there should be more? There should be that clarification is needed on the federal level of who's actually in charge, or it should be at the top. When there's a cyber incident.
So in this case, certainly, CISA did undertake our asset response role, and of course, the advisories and communications that we put out were joint with the FBI, consistent with PPD 41 and not with other agencies outside of that construct. But certainly, we are deeply conscious that as we see the potential for these sort of incidents that bring together cyber intrusions and very real functional impacts that affect Americans' lives, it's deeply important for the US government to communicate clearly and concretely about how we approach these incidents and how we manage them as a whole of government effort to both reduce their prevalence and minimize impacts to the American people.
I get that. And under PPD 41, I know my time's at the end, but why was this not a significant cyber incident under PPD? This seems pretty significant. Why was this not?
This was absolutely a significant event. Anytime when we have Americans worried about cessation of an essential function like fuel, that is absolutely a significant event. Here, however, based upon information received from Colonial, the cyber incident aspects of this event were well managed by a trusted third party. And so based upon that information, the event itself was unequivocally significant and certainly dealt with as such at the highest levels of the US government, but the cyber incident aspect of it was well managed by a third party and was a very well-known type of ransomware that likely didn't reach the cyber-specific threshold of significance that would usually trigger that designation under PPD 41.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Goldstein. Thank you, Mr. Gabriel. Mr. Thompson, recognize you.
Thank you very much. And let me thank the witnesses for their testimony. Mr. Goldstein, it's always good to see you as a witness. You're good. I want you to tell me what authorities you think CISA lacks at this point in time that this committee could help you with.
Thank you, sir. It's always good to see you as well. I will really hearken back to Ms. Clark's eloquent statements, which is we need the ability to get visibility into national cybersecurity risks. We need to understand where adversaries are intruding into networks across this country. We need to understand the techniques that they're using to break in. We need to understand what they're doing or trying to do. The more of that kind of information that we get, we can then protect others, and we can work as a whole of government to reduce the risk facing our country.
So how do we codify that authority that you're describing?
Yes, sir. So certainly the more that we as a country can do to drive reporting of cybersecurity incidents to CISA, as TSA recently did with their security directives, and certainly as several of your colleagues have suggested via other avenues, that will help drive that change. The second part, sir, is we need the ability to address resource gaps across far too many entities in this country, particularly our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners. The more that we can do to help organizations that may be under-resourced and find it hard to invest in core cybersecurity, build cybersecurity programs, including in the context of incident response, through the Cyber Response and Recovery Fund, or through other mechanisms that allow our SLTT partners to get the funding they need, that will all help raise the bar.
Well, thank you. So, so do we need voluntary compliance on the part of companies? Do you see some something down the road where we'll have to require companies to meet a test for their systems?
Certainly, sir. CISA right now is urgently focused on making best use of the voluntary partnership model, where we are encouraging companies and giving companies help and resources to drive security across their systems and manage national risk. They're absolutely.
Well,
Please,
okay,
sir.
I don't want to go over my time, but that's a good point. So what did Colonial do?
Sir, I don't have deep visibility into Colonial's security posture at the time of the intrusion. It is certainly the case today that there are many organizations in this company, in this country, who for a variety of reasons are unable to invest in the security they need, and the US government must take urgent steps to incentivize, drive, require those companies to make the investments that they need to make.
Okay, well, thank you. Now, Ms. Proctor, what is your knowledge of what TSA did on the security side?
So thank you so much for that question, sir. TSA has had a long security relationship with Colonial, and that goes back to the beginning of our pipeline security guidelines. We have conducted corporate security reviews with Colonial in the past. We have had, as you're aware, we have done critical facility security reviews with them. And last year, during the pandemic, we approached Colonial to engage in a validated architecture design review. That conversation was ongoing over a period of time, and they recently submitted their approval to participate in the VADAR. It is now scheduled for the last week of July of this year. But we have conducted.
Thank you. And my concern is that if there's no regulatory requirement for companies to allow TSA or whomever to look at their security protocols, they'll tell you to come back next month. They'll tell you to come back in 6 months. And I'm just concerned that given the expansion of ransomware attacks, a voluntary system without some compliance authority mandated puts us at risk. And you don't have to comment. That's
Sure,
my thoughts on it. You can have relationships. Well, you can have relationships with companies, but if that company knows that they don't have to, at the end of the day, comply, then I just don't see us working to a threshold for security. And so, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize Representative Harshbarger for her 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, some ranking members and witnesses. I have a question for Mr. Goldstein. You know, CISA needs to engage directly with our nation's business leaders. And my goodness, there's even a voluntary program where they'll assess their vulnerabilities. But most of these companies, you know, they won't do it. And I totally understand why. They're afraid that their customer base may see that they have vulnerabilities, and they may not want them to know that they somehow would have their information compromised. There's things like their stock prices may drop. They may be afraid that they'd be hauled in front of Congress if this vulnerability is shown. So I do understand that. I guess my question is, what is CISA's position on whether a victim of ransomware should pay the ransom or not? Who decides that?
Thank you for that question, ma'am. It is the position of the U.S. government that to strongly discourage the payment of ransoms. This is the case for two reasons. First of all, paying a ransom offers no assurance that the victim organization will actually have their data restored or have stolen data returned. And we have seen many instances of ransomware gangs either failing to decrypt the data or providing a decryption tool that only decrypts part of the data and still leaves a lot of the data locked up and unusable. But of course, the second reason is that these ransomware campaigns and these criminal gangs are fueled by ransom payments. And the more that organizations pay ransom, the more that we can expect these criminal gangs to be incentivized to continue this scourge of attacks against U.S. critical infrastructure. The decision to pay remains with the impacted company, and certainly for many companies, this is a hard decision, particularly if they provide some critical service. But these payments again provide no assurance of restoration and are what is driving these campaigns and these really damaging attacks to continue.
Do you know how many private companies have paid ransomware because they were hacked? And, you know, a lot of companies, even in my district, they don't even report it because of those reasons I gave you initially. And, you know, you can't really track and get an accurate number of how many people have been hacked or paid the ransom because they don't want you to know. And then they have cyber insurance because of these ransomware attacks. This is, I mean, it's gotten out of control when our own government, you have 9 different agencies hacked and they don't really know how it happened, and it was an outside entity that had to tell us. So there's a lot of reasons I understand why private businesses won't voluntarily be assessed, even to find out what their own vulnerabilities are. Maybe they just don't trust the government, I don't know. But what percentage of companies do you have numbers on that report that they have had to pay ransomware or they've been compromised? Do you have a number?
So, ma'am, we don't have a good number today, and it gets back to the question that the chairman raised, which is today, it is largely voluntary whether a victim of a cybersecurity intrusion, including ransomware attacks, does report to either CISA or federal law enforcement. I do want to comment briefly, though, ma'am, on your last point, which is well taken, on disincentives for sharing information with the government, because Congress has already acted to largely address many of those concerns, both in the Cybersecurity Act of 2015 and in the Protected Critical Infrastructure Information Act, both of which provide strong protections for information shared by the private sector with CISA, including protections from regimes like FOIA, regulatory use, civil litigation, et cetera. And so certainly one of our goals at CISA is to ensure a broad understanding of these protections and ensure companies take advantage of them by reporting both their cybersecurity risks and incidents to CISA.
Yeah, this is big business right now, and we've got to get a handle on it, and that's why we're having these hearings. And I do have another question. Why, and this is just your opinion, why do you think the FBI did not take this committee up on our invitation, I guess you could say?
Ma'am, I've not discussed that question with my colleagues at the FBI and wouldn't be able to comment.
Well, that's your opinion. I appreciate that. I don't know, how much time do I have left?
You have 20 seconds.
20 seconds. Well, I'll just yield back. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, thank you very much. I'll now recognize Representative Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. We've certainly realized that we've put this off for too long. We need to get on top of it, and the testimony has been excellent. We focused on the Colonial pipeline, but I'd like to be sure that other kinds of energy infrastructure are protected, like generating stations. I represent Las Vegas, and we have a lot of lights there, and we need a lot of source of energy, and then that's consistent, that's persistent, that we can count on to serve our residents and also 40 million visitors. Now, Nevada Energy is our primary provider of energy, and they are doing a lot of investing in renewable energy resources, and they're developing them throughout the state, mostly solar, but some wind, which I think is a great thing. But I want to be sure that the government is adequately protecting those sources too from these kinds of threats. I wonder if y'all would comment on what CISA and TSA are doing in anticipation of maybe some needs in this area.
Yes, ma'am. So certainly CISA is deeply focused on cybersecurity risk facing the energy sector and generation entities in particular. Of particular note, the White House recently announced a 100-day industrial control system cybersecurity sprint, and the first sprint focused precisely on this sector, recognizing the centrality of the energy grid, of course, to our nation's economy and national security, and the potential for a cybersecurity event to cause significant disruption. Certainly many entities across the electric subsector are well resourced and mature in this space. This is a sector that recognizes the risk and has invested accordingly, but certainly CISA and our colleagues at DOE are deeply focused on providing tools, resources, and guidance to this sector, recognizing the risk and the need to make further investments to stay ahead of our adversaries.
So do you work directly with the utilities? You would be working directly with Nevada Energy to help them to be sure they're up to speed?
Yes, ma'am. I can take back to see if we've worked with Nevada Energy recently, but certainly we work very consistently with individual operators to assess their security and make sure that they have what they need to be secure.
No, I'm glad to hear that. Yes. The comment. Well, a second question that I have is that I know one of the problems that we often have is trying to recruit and train and have in the field cyber professionals. And I understand that there's a program, it's a scholarship program called CyberCore. Now, my district is home to several minority serving institutions. And I just wonder how much outreach you're doing or how much work you're doing with those institutions to try to attract and train people who will have the skills to enter into this field that's going to be needed increasingly as we go forward.
Ma'am, thanks so much for that question. You're absolutely correct. The building a deep, diverse cybersecurity workforce is absolutely essential for us, not only getting our arms around this risk, but managing it going forward. CISA is deeply focused on working with institutions across the country, but particularly minority serving institutions, HBCUs, community colleges, to make sure that those schools have curriculum, have training, have resources and assistance so that they can train the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. And certainly we are focused in that regard, not only training that workforce so they can join federal service, including through programs like Scholarship for Service, but also ensure that we are driving and catalyzing a robust educational community around the cybersecurity workforce at all levels of education to ensure that we are educating people today so that they can be well equipped for the jobs of tomorrow.
I'm going to reach out to the campuses in my district about this CyberCore program and see what they're doing. And then can I have them get in touch with your office or somebody there to find out how they might enhance that and maybe get the word out more and be sure students there know that they can apply for this kind of program?
Yes, ma'am, most certainly.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
I'm going to take this opportunity to ask Ms. Proctor a question that I tried to ask when our system went down. Ms. Proctor, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Oh, thank you very much. You know, Given that operators will only be required to self-assess their compliance with TSA guidelines, how will TSA verify the information provided? And what will the consequences be if the pipeline operator misrepresents their cybersecurity practices to the TSA?
Thank you so much for that question, because I think it's important to know that under the first security directive we've issued, there is a requirement for companies to conduct a self-assessment as part of those requirements in Security Directive 1. However, we are continuing to develop additional measures for pipeline companies, and we are developing now a second security directive, which would have the force of a regulation. And that one will require more specific mitigation measures, and it will ultimately include more specific requirements with regard to assessments. The second security directive is going to be an SSI directive because of the nature of the mitigating measures that are going to be required within there. But these are also subject to inspection by TSI inspectors. We have a cadre of surface inspectors that we have trained that underwent training at PHMSA's Training Academy for pipeline operations. We have a subset of them who have also undergone cybersecurity training. They just recently completed an in-residence course at Idaho National Labs. So they have both pipeline operations training and cyber training. Those will be the individuals who will be ensuring that the pipeline companies are adhering to what's required in those security directives.
Thank you. Yes or no? Do you all have the resources and personnel that you need to be able to ensure the accountability measures that we think are important?
Yes, ma'am. We do have those resources now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Van Drew from New Jersey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have just some questions, and some of them may seem a little repetitive, but I really want to tack this down. For Sonia Proctor from the TSA, I understand there are growing concerns that the TSA
Congressman, can you unmute? I guess while we're trying to work this out, I will recognize Representative Clyde.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing. And this question is for Eric Goldstein. Mr. Goldstein, the subcommittee held a hearing last month on the ransomware crisis with experts from the private sector, former Director Krebs responding to a question of mine about how CISA gets the word out about its great services, said that marketing is not an area of strength for the agency. Considering the recent attacks where CISA has not been directly involved, I think it's important that business leaders, critical infrastructure companies, and state and local governments are aware of CISA and its great services. So my question to you is, how many dedicated marketing professionals does CISA have? If I may, sir.
Thank you, sir. So I don't have an exact number on the size of our relevant external affairs team. Happy to take that back for you. What I would say is fully agree with the general point. It is absolutely critical for CISA to make sure that every company in this country, as well as every SLTT government partner, understands the services that we are offering and understand how our services can help them drive down cybersecurity risks and the investments that they need to make. And so certainly we need to do more to convey that message to every corner of this country. And part of doing that is by having, as you frame it, sir, marketing campaigns that make sure that the word gets out effectively. So that is an area of urgent investment for us. And the point, sir, is very well taken.
Okay, well, because the more I learn about you, the more I like you, okay? So I want to make sure that the entire nation knows just what outstanding services you provide. And so I strongly encourage you to have a very good media campaign, because I think our businesses need it. Okay, we need to know that CISA is there really to help. Tell me, does CISA have a position on whether the victim of a ransomware attack should pay a ransom?
Sir, we do. We advocate that victims, we strongly discourage victims from paying ransom. And as noted, I think, to a prior question, that is for two reasons. First, because there's no guarantee that victims will have their data restored. And second, of course, because paying ransoms is exactly what these criminal gangs want. And paying ransoms only further incentivizes these sort of damaging attacks to continue.
Okay, does CISA have an offensive capability?
We do not, sir. We are purely a cyber defensive organization.
Okay, all right. Last week I asked Firefly Senior VP Charles Carmichael if his company would be willing to work with the federal government in helping secure our network, and he stated that he would certainly be interested in the opportunity. Mr. Carmichael also stated that he believes the attacks on the Colonial pipelines and JBS Foods originated overseas. Does CISA work with the private sector regarding any intelligence sharing or threat assessments to safeguard private or public networks?
We do, sir. We have deep relationships with many, if not the vast majority, of the nation's leading cybersecurity companies, internet companies, cloud providers to do just the work you described, sharing and exchanging information that these companies are learning about cybersecurity risks affecting their customers, fusing that together with what CISA is learning from federal networks and what we are learning from our partners elsewhere in government, and developing that common operating picture of cybersecurity risks. We have made real investments there, but there is certainly more work to do to ensure that we have that deep visibility we need to understand risks that are impacting our country.
Okay, would you agree with his assessment that these attacks were perpetrated from overseas, all of them or any of them from this country that you know of?
Sir, as a general matter, many of these ransomware gangs are domiciled overseas. I'm not able to speak about any particular act in this case, sir.
Okay, do you have any evidence that would suggest that they were sponsored by a foreign state?
Sir, in general terms, these criminal groups are seeking financial gain and are generally not seeking these sorts of strategic ends sought by nation states.
Okay, if CISA doesn't have an offensive capability, do you know, does one exist in our country somewhere?
Sir, there are various other federal agencies that do exercise under their own authorities the ability to disrupt adversaries using cyber means, including within the Defense Department. I would, of course, defer to those departments for further detail on their activities.
Okay, do you coordinate with any of those to assist them in
Yes,
what you
sir.
see?
Yes, sir. We work very deeply across the interagency with federal law enforcement, with the Defense Department and other partners to ensure that we are sharing information and that all of our activities across the government are well coordinated and aligned.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate your responses in that. And with that, I yield back.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Representative Clyde, for raising that issue, because I was just talking about that myself, and I think the capacity to be able to be on the offensive is something we really do have to drill down a little bit better on. Mr. Langevin?
Very good. Madam Chair, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. Madam Chair, thank you for holding this joint hearing. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today and for the important work that they're doing. Mr. Goldstein, let me start with you, if I could. Last week, in front of this committee, I was so bold as to offer CISA's service to the CEO of Colonial Pipeline, and he refused them. So I urge him certainly to reconsider, as he says he's acting for the good of the country. So that being said, I just want to confirm that the offer is still on the table. And so, Mr. Goldstein, just to confirm, CISA stands ready to offer assistance on the networks of the Colonial Pipeline if your services are requested, correct?
Yes, sir. We stand ready to support any entity providing critical services in this country, including, of course, Colonial.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Mr. Goldstein, now I know that CISA is a relatively new agency, and not everyone is familiar with the services that you offer. Can you help the committee understand what value you bring to entities when they invite you onto the networks following a breach? Furthermore, what benefits to other critical infrastructure owners and operators across various sectors can CISA bring to the table by having on-network presence? I hope that the CEO of Colonial is watching. Maybe this will encourage him to invite you in once and for all.
Indeed. Thank you for that question, sir. And the way you framed it is exactly right. And first and foremost, it bears noting that we do encourage organizations that are victimized by a cybersecurity incident to bring on a third-party private response provider if they're so inclined. And we work very frequently closely in tandem with private incident response firms to conduct a joint response. And so CISA's role is not replacing the extraordinary talent in the private cybersecurity market, but is instead additive thereto. And that's the case really in two ways. The first is in supporting a victim of a cybersecurity intrusion, we're able to bring to bear information from other federal agencies and from what we've learned across incidents affecting the federal government and our other partners, and enrich the incident response that may be already undertaken by the victim itself or their third party provider. And so we can complement and add to the incident response, bringing some unique information, and in the case of incidents that impact control systems, some unique expertise and capability. And in fact, our team that's focused on control system cybersecurity is actually one of the oldest and most expert teams doing that kind of work. And so in the first instance, we can be deeply complementary to and additive to the work already going on by a victim organization. And of course, if a victim chooses not to bring on a third party and seek CISA's help foundationally, we can certainly provide that primary incident response role as well. But as you note, sir, our role extends far more broadly. And we are focused on managing national risk and ensuring that a cybersecurity intrusion that impacts one entity doesn't spread across others. And certainly, organizations should think of this as, even if you're not a victim today, you may be one tomorrow. And if you are one today, that doesn't mean that you will not have an intrusion again in the future. And so organizations should certainly see this as an issue of national interest, where the more information that CISA can receive in the early days of an incident by being part of the incident response and part of that initial assessment, that lets us move more quickly to glean information, glean those technical indicators that we can then share either in a focused way with organizations that may be directly impacted based upon their sector, their technology footprint, their geography, or broadly and nationally and even internationally to raise the cost for our adversaries and ensure that they're not using these same tactics, these same indicators over and over again.
Thank you for that. And before my time expires, Mr. Goldstein, we've seen press reports that third-party incident responders suggested not bringing the government in. Do you find that outside cyber consultants tend to work cooperatively with CISA in emergency situations like this one with Colonial, for example, or do they bring their clients' reservations about government involvement?
So we do find in general, sir, that certainly most of the major cybersecurity providers in this country work collaboratively with CISA. And we have deep relationships with many of them and have ongoing operational collaboration around significant campaigns and significant threats. And certainly would discourage any company or third party from deciding not to share information with the government. As noted throughout this hearing, this really at this point is both an issue of national security and public health and safety. And the more that the US government can understand this risk and take urgent action to mitigate it, the more we can drive down this trend over time and protect our people.
Thank you very much. The gentleman is out of time. Thank you. I understand Mr. Van Drew is now available to be recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you. I'll give this a shot again. We had some technical issues. So although Congress gave the TSA authority over pipeline in 2001, there have recently been efforts to transfer its authority to the Department of Energy.
Mr. Vandu is having technical problems again. We cannot hear you. So I will recognize Representative LaTurner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are for Mr. Goldstein. Mr. Goldstein, how are you doing today?
Doing well, sir. Thank you.
Good. Thanks for being with us. Could you help us understand how many, just the scope in the federal government of how many different government agencies are dealing with cybersecurity or ransomware, either on an offensive or defensive nature?
Certainly, sir. So the existing model for the federal government cybersecurity is, in the first instance, there are two agencies that are focused on cybersecurity incident response, and that is CISA as the lead for asset response, which are efforts to understand and mitigate the immediate impacts of an incident, and then help to protect others. And then our colleagues at the FBI, who are the leads for threat response and focused on understanding the adversary, and then, of course, taking actions to disrupt or impose costs. Apart from CISA and the FBI, there are a number of sector risk management agencies that bring to bear specialized authorities in their sectors that may support CISA and the FBI for a cybersecurity incident affecting their sector. And then, of course, apart from the civilian space, both the Department of Defense and our nation's intelligence community have unique authorities to either gather information about adversaries who are seeking to damage our country through cyber means, or, of course, take other measures to impose costs on our adversaries wherever they may be.
The Colonial Pipeline CEO recommended that there be designated a single point of contact to coordinate the response to cyber attacks and incidents at large. What's your reaction to that?
So, sir, our goal as a U.S. government is to make this as easy as possible for victims of cybersecurity incidents. And certainly today, if an organization calls CISA, if they call the FBI, if they even call their sector risk management agency, they should get the same response. And so we have worked deeply within the federal government to ensure that we are providing victims of cybersecurity incidents with all of the resources that the federal government can bring to bear. And I think that this actually worked fairly well in the context of the Colonial intrusion, where there was a wide breadth of federal agencies based upon the unique attributes of this incident, but those agencies collaborated well together behind the scenes, and Colonial was able to interact with a handful of agencies and not, frankly, the full breadth of agencies with some authority to manage an incident of this complexity. But certainly, to your point, we can always do more to make this clearer to the private sector and make sure that the activity of reporting an incident to the federal government and engaging our help is as frictionless as possible and as simple as possible.
I talk to people in the private sector in my state that this has happened to, and it's happened to a lot, and the number seems to be growing. And so it's a great concern to me that the federal response to this can be kind of clunky. It's been described or suggested by some that we have one person that coordinates this and have the ability to control the budgets of all these other entities. Do you have a response to that?
So, sir, I think the answer is twofold.
There's some precedent for it in the past as well. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr.
Certainly, sir. So certainly the various agencies involved here, and certainly CISA and FBI as being the lead for cyber asset response, have unique authorities and unique capabilities to bring to bear. The Senate had the opportunity to hear testimony from our nominee for National Cyber Director just last week. And that role, I think, will also help further codify the structure and the engagement model and further streamline the manner in which the federal government engages with all manner of entities. And so we're looking forward both to the speedy confirmation of the National Cyber Director, as well as, of course, to the Director Designate for CISA. Both of those individuals, I think, will help the government further mature our processes for simplifying engagement with the private sector.
Do you think that solves the problem, though? Because I think, from my perspective, it could still put us in the exact position that we're in right now, maybe improve it, right? But at the end of the day, it's concerning to me that we don't have one point of contact who controls the budgets, who can force these different bureaucracies to come together and make sure that our response in the United States is clear and concise and efficient. Do you think that those confirmations fix that problem?
I think that we are making progress over time in significant ways. And I will say, sir, I was in this agency, 5 years ago, having recently come back in. We've made significant progress in the intervening time. I think the confirmation of both the new CISA director and the national cyber director will make another significant step forward in our ability to offer the sort of simplified, cohesive engagement model that you describe. But assuredly, we'll have more work to do because this is a deeply evolving space. And as U.S. government, we'll have to evolve the pace.
Thank you for your
very much,
response.
Mr. Goldstein.
Thank you, Madam
Representative Attorney, your time has expired. Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative Slotkin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to our witnesses for being here. Two very different questions. After the Colonial pipeline was attacked, I went to all of the CEOs of the pipelines that crisscross through Michigan, both over land and over sea, or under our inland seas, and asked them what they were doing in the wake of the Colonial attack to improve their own cybersecurity, learning from the painful example that Colonial was offering us. And I know that we put in these new procedures at the end of May. So I just want to understand in a very concrete way what actually happens. Let's say Enbridge, which is a big pipeline company, they go under the Straits of Mackinac, a very sensitive place in Michigan's Great Lakes. Let's say they are attacked. What is the actual procedure? Tell me the 911 process from the moment they're attacked in terms of engaging with federal agencies. Whoever is the responsible party should take that one.
Certainly, ma'am. So I can take it first, and then I'll handle my colleague. So and I will defer to my colleague if this pipeline is in scope for the TSA directive, but the TSA directive does require a certain set of pipeline entities to report cybersecurity intrusions centrally to CISA. Upon receiving such a report, CISA triages the report based upon a standard methodology to assess the criticality of the incident based upon risk to the country, the nature of the entity, the nature of the intrusion, and then certainly for an incident affecting an entity of the criticality that you note, we would likely offer some measure of incident response or threat hunting assistance. Now, I will note in this case, it would still remain voluntary for this pipeline entity to accept our assistance. And this entity could say they have chosen to engage a third party, and that's how they want to engage their response. Now, even in that model, we would still encourage them to share information with us urgently so that we can help them with the response and protect others. I'm sorry, ma'am, go ahead.
But as a requirement, just so I understand, is it true that within 12 hours now, they must contact CISA? Is that the sort of requirement with the new rules that were put in place at the end of May?
Ma'am,
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so just so I understand, that's the 911 call they must make within 12 hours if they detect some sort of cyber intrusion. Okay, and I know it depends on the type of pipeline, but that I understand. And then completely different question on the sort of eve of a big meeting between President Biden and Vladimir Putin, where Putin has suggested that there be some sort of trade for groups that are conducting ransomware attacks, from Russia, and groups that are allegedly conducting ransomware attacks from the United States. Can you confirm for me? I know you're defensive and not offensive in nature. I know that which they're not law enforcement. But Mr. Goldstein, can you just confirm in one sort of yes or no? The United States of America has the ability to go after any criminal actors who are conducting ransomware attacks here or abroad.
Ma'am, that question will get into the authorities vested in federal law enforcement, which I'm not able to answer.
Okay. Have you seen the Russians do anything to try and clamp down on ransomware actors emanating from their soil?
Ma'am, I think what I can say generally there is, we strongly encourage all countries to take urgent action against ransomware actors operating within any country. And the trend that we have seen of ransomware attacks over the past year suggests that such action across the board is not being taken.
Right. Okay. So it's more, I understand it's not your jurisdiction. I guess I just want to make the point that a trade between Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden makes zero sense because we actually go after our criminals. We actually would take action if we had a ransomware group that were threatening other countries, that were attacking Russia or attacking a European ally or attacking China, that we would go after them, unlike the Russians who have taken at best limited action against those who we know, who we have said publicly are attacking United States infrastructure. So it's more of a statement. I just feel like until we get to the root of the problem, that no action is being taken, often by the Russians and the Chinese, against actors emanating from their soil. We're going to keep having this conversation over and over again. And I know I'm out of time. I will leave it at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. We'll now recognize Representative Loria for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and the chairs and ranking members of both committees for having this important hearing. I was reviewing one report and I saw that there were over 304 million ransomware attacks worldwide in 2020. And that was a 62% increase from 2019. So the recent Colonial pipeline ransomware attack was obviously not the first we've seen against a critical infrastructure, but it spurred the fuel shortages across the eastern seaboard for several days. And at the local level, we're seeing impacts like this as well. In my district, for example, the Hampton Roads Sanitation District suffered a ransomware attack last November that disrupted billing across the service region for several weeks. And I think that we can all agree that ransomware attacks are a national security crisis. And as Chairman Thompson noted last week, the Colonial pipeline ransomware attack raised serious questions about the cybersecurity practices of our critical infrastructure owners and operators, and whether the voluntary cybersecurity standards are sufficient to defend ourselves against these types of cyber threats. So I wanted to ask the question of our witnesses today. With regards to our critical infrastructure owners and operators, such as those that operate pipelines, what evidence do you and other agencies have that the organizations you oversee actually understand the extent of their cybersecurity risk?
Yeah, we offer briefings to owners and operators of critical infrastructure based on the threat that has been made clear over the last several years. We have arranged classified briefings for owners and operators of infrastructure to ensure that they understand the nature of the threat. And we also have provided assessments, vulnerability assessments, so that they can identify and then close those cybersecurity gaps to make themselves less likely to be a successful target for those who would be likely to launch those kinds of intrusions. We also work with owners and operators to conduct exercises so that they can actually exercise their plans. It's one thing to have plans on paper. It's another thing to be able to exercise those both within your company and within the region or with others in your industry. So we have a layered approach, both in terms of providing education, assessments, exercises to exercise those plans, and to be able to continue to inform of emerging threats and to keep this cycle of both informing, exercising, and updating plans to keep that process underway.
Well, thank you. And I mean, that does sound like a good resource and a good way for them to understand the potential threats, the emerging threats, help developing plans. But can you clarify, am I understanding that this is still all voluntary on behalf of the companies?
Well, currently, we certainly started out with the pipeline security guidelines, which were not mandatory. But as of May 28th, we issued our first security directive, which has the power of a regulation. We're in the process now of developing our second security directive, again, which will be mandatory, which will have more specific mandatory mitigating measures that will be required by owners and operators. That directive is going to be very specific. So that is going to be marked as an SSI document, security sensitive information. So that one will have a lot more detail and will be rather prescriptive in terms of the mitigation measures required.
Well, thank you. And just in the last couple seconds remaining, do you have a good assessment for all of the operators of the major pipelines, where they are on a scale that shows both their awareness, their preparedness, their plans, their training that they've completed in order to execute plans? And is that something you're tracking so that kind of within the network of pipelines around the country, where the biggest vulnerabilities exist?
Within the network of critical pipelines, we have conducted corporate security reviews and critical facility security reviews with most of those. So we do have a good baseline for them in terms of where they are with regard to their corporate plans, their cybersecurity plans, and also with their critical facilities in the field. So those are assessments that we continually perform with owners and operators in the pipeline community.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And my time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes Representative Rice.
Thank you so much. Mr. Goldstein, I know that Chairman Thompson had asked you some questions about, additional resources and such. I mean, it's clear that, your agency has issued extensive ransomware guidance and led efforts such as the Reduce the Risk of Ransomware campaign to help owners and operators of critical infrastructure prepare for ransomware threats. But we also know that, the Colonial hack demonstrates that even when companies are willing to self-report and engage with law enforcement after a ransomware attack, they may not report to or engage directly with CISA. And I think that's one of the issues we need to address here. So is this something that, CISA is not being clear enough to owners and operators about the value added that you could bring to their protection of their, critical infrastructure? Or is it just that they're saying thanks, but no thanks?
There is certainly more that we can do to make sure that companies across sectors understand the unique value proposition, which we discussed in response to Congressman Langevin question, about engaging CISA and the way that value is unique and additive to engaging a third-party response firm, and additive to engaging with federal law enforcement. We work very closely with our partners in federal law enforcement and often conduct joint responses because we are achieving different mission objectives when we support a victim organization. And so certainly continuing to clarify the value proposition that CISA brings to the table and differentiating that and showing that it's complementary to engaging other partners, I do think is a critical area of further work for the agency.
What percentage of ransomware attacks would you say get reported to CISA?
So, ma'am, as noted, due to the real challenge we have here with visibility, we don't have a good number there. What I would say is after recent intrusions, Colonial, JBS Foods, et cetera, we are seeing a real increase, both in organizations that are reporting incidents and also in organizations that are availing themselves of CISA's guidance and best practices. And as just one example, in the week after the Colonial intrusion, I think we saw an increased views of our ransomware guide, I think something like 400% for that week after. And so we are seeing organizations across the country recognize this risk and recognizing that CISA is a source of support and expertise. We just need to make sure that continues and that we reach again into every corner of the country going forward.
Well, I agree with that, Mr. Goldstein, but I also think it's really important for whatever federal agency it is that gets contacted by an operator of a critical piece of infrastructure in this country, that whether they take it to the FBI, that the FBI brings in CISA and whatever other agency, federal agency, we need to partner with to address this as comprehensively as possible. And I hope that that's what the practice is, or if it isn't, will be going forward. Ms. Proctor, just in the past few weeks, a ransomware attack against a Massachusetts ferry operator shut down travel between the state and its islands. And it was revealed that hackers had breached the networks of New York's MTA, on whose trains my constituents work and ride every day. Now, neither of those hacks posed a risk to passenger safety, but cyber attacks targeting mass transit, railways, aviation, they had the potential to put travelers at risk and would be massively disruptive to society writ large. So can you specifically discuss the recent ransomware attack against the MTA?
Yes, ma'am. As a matter of fact, I can. After that incident, I actually did speak with New York MTA's CISO, and I did learn from speaking with him that the attack was not considered to be successful. They did not actually access information in the system. They did not make a demand for ransom. They did not acquire information from the MTA. The example that the CISO used would be that the ransomware intrusion opened the screen door but did not get in the front door.
Okay,
that
so
was the example that they used. They did not acquire anything in that attempt.
Thank you for that clarification. I think it's really important for TSA to engage with MTA and other public transit agencies on security measures and cybersecurity in particular, not just private sector companies who are running pieces of critical infrastructure. Thank you both so much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. We recognize Mr. Gottheimer from New Jersey.
Thank you, Chairwoman Watson-Coleman, also from New Jersey, and Chairwoman Clark for recognizing me and arranging today's important hearing on cyber threats to pipelines. The recent ransomware attack in the United States' largest fuel pipeline, Colonial pipeline, I think many Americans across the East Coast experience a rush on gas and long lines at the pump because of the collective failure to secure our critical infrastructure from hackers, as we've heard time and time again today and before. I think it's fair to say that Colonial had serious security flaws, including an outdated VPN system, which permitted ransomware hackers to breach Colonial systems without required dual-factor authentication. However, I'm also concerned that Colonial's spotty record of engagement with TSA, which since 9/11 has been tasked with securing our pipelines by conducting voluntary assessments of private operators. If I can ask Assistant Administrator Proctor, we may know that on multiple occasions prior to the attack on May 7th, TSA requested cybersecurity assessments of the Colonial system, but Colonial repeatedly punted and is yet to participate in these assessments. Can you please compare TSA's experience with Colonial to the cooperation you receive from other pipeline operators?
Yes, sir. I would speak to that in that the experience we've had with Colonial is for the requests that they have made to reschedule, not unusual during the pandemic. During the pandemic, there were a number of companies that had limited personnel on site. They considered their personnel on site to be essential personnel. They did restrict them from a lot of interaction with outsiders. So Colonial had postponed the discussion to get a scheduled date for their VADAR assessment. The postponement was not unusual for other companies. Other companies did go through. We did pivot, and we did manage to find a way to conduct the VADAR virtually. So we were able to schedule those in other cases. The Colonial discussion was postponed because they were installing some new software. At one point, they were doing some other updates, and we had spoken in March. They had asked for about 6 weeks to complete some cyber updates, and the 6 weeks was actually the week after the incident with Colonial. We have since focused on getting that date in place. They are now scheduled for the last week of July for their validated architecture design review.
Got it. Has a pipeline ever flat out refused to cooperate with an inspection or assessment? And or try to limit the scope of what you are assessing?
No, it wasn't a refusal. It was rescheduling the discussion so that they could deal with personnel issues. At one point, we had a conversation set with them, and they had several employees that were COVID impacted, so they delayed and delayed.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to ask: is that similar? But in terms of others ever done the same thing where they've delayed, if others refused, other pipelines? Is this consistent where they'll ask for extra time?
We have had other delays, but we have gotten to the point where we have done those assessments, and we did work out a way to do them virtually, so it made this more manageable for the company, even though they were trying to protect their essential employees from engaging with outsiders.
Got it. Thank you so much. Mr. Goldstein, we've recently witnessed a series of attacks, not just against pipelines, but also against mass transportation infrastructure. Clearly, we need robust cybersecurity standards for the transportation sector writ large. What additional measures can we take to protect this sector, not just from ransomware hackers, but also determine nation-state adversaries like China, Iran, or North Korea?
Thank you, sir. The good news here is that there is nothing particularly unique about ransomware intrusions, right? The sorts of cybersecurity advisories and best practices that are promulgated by CISA and the sorts of cybersecurity directives that we impose upon federal civilian agencies are effective against ransomware actors, nation states, and really any adversaries. In addition, as we think through the more sophisticated types of adversaries that may want to cause more lasting damage or gain more persistence, that is where a program like CyberSentry really comes into play. Our ability to gain persistent visibility into cybersecurity risks affecting our most critical infrastructure. And by broadening and maturing that pilot program, we'll be able to get more visibility and drive targeted action to drive out those risks and intrusions as soon as they're identified.
Thank you. I yield back. Thank you so much, Chairwoman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I want to thank the witnesses. Your testimony has been invaluable, enlightening, and thank you so much. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for you all, the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. The chair reminds members of the subcommittee that the committee's record will remain open for 10 days, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you so much.